PoE 2's early access opened almost a month ago now, and reviews for the game have generally been very positive. Many players naturally are comparing it to Diablo 4, which has been out for about a year and a half, so almost a full year and a half longer than PoE 2 has been out. And generally, the consensus is that even in its early access stage, with most of its content not available yet, PoE 2 is a better game. Now, with that said, the game is not perfect, naturally, and as you would expect, because it is in its early access stage. Now, I have enjoyed playing PoE 2. I am not a full time content creator, so I don't have the hundreds or thousands of hours in the game that maybe some of the other folks like Asmon, Rax, Darth have on the game, but I've got a couple dozen hours, somewhere around like 70 hours in the game. And I've enjoyed it. I've had fun playing it, but I do think, particularly in its current iteration, that the game is not for everyone right now. And here are four reasons why that is. The first reason why, in its current iteration, PoE 2's early access might not be for you is that the class you want to play simply isn't in the game yet. The perfect example of that is the Templar class. I love to play Templar. Any game where there is an option for me to play a Templar, whether it's a tabletop game or an RPG, I play Templar, something or Paladin, right? So the idea of playing this holy warrior going around smiting folks, I've always just found very compelling and entertaining for myself. Well, Templar isn't in the game yet. Currently in the game, the closest thing we have to a Templar is the warrior class, which is really not the same at all. It's the playstyle is more of how I would think a traditional barbarian would kind of play. And with the only weapon that it can use really being the mace, which is generally considered the worst weapon in the game because it's super slow and super clunky. Warrior just it doesn't scratch the same itch. So if you are looking at the list of unreleased classes and you are thinking to yourself, that could be something I'm interested in playing, or you're looking at the list of existing classes and you're thinking to yourself, none of these really appeal to me. Well, that's a perfectly, I think, valid reason to maybe hold off and wait till additional classes and content is added into the game. The second reason why it might be a good idea for you to wait until the game has been out for a little bit longer or the full game comes out is that theory crafting isn't really your thing, and or you don't have a whole lot of time. And when you play video games, even games like Path of Exile 2, you like to just sit down and play the game and have fun. And you don't want to sit there and have to really understand all the intricacies of what's going on. Path of Exile has always been a fairly complex game. I mean, if you look at the passive skill tree from the first one, it's completely overwhelming. And even the idea of attempting to design your own build that can begin to attempt the end game is just completely overwhelming to most people. Now, they have taken fairly decent steps to, I think, simplify the game and the passive skill tree. When you look at it, it doesn't make your eyes glaze over and just make you want to turn the game off. That said, it's still a lot, right? And you have to understand how the different attributes and effects interact with each other in order to build a cohesive character. And for some people, that's just not their thing. There are many people out there who have an abundance of time to sit and game. Maybe they're single with a standard 9 to 5 job. Maybe they're teenagers or in college, and that's their primary hobby over the summers, holidays, etc. And then there's, of course, the content creators who, again, do this full time, 8 to 16 hours a day, every single day. But I would wager that most people playing the game and most of the people watching this video likely have a limited amount of time to game, whether because they have to work multiple jobs, have a demanding job that isn't confined to only 9 to 5, they have kids or other responsibilities, etc. Being able to sit down and just game for 2, 3, 4 dozen hours a week to flesh out your own build and understand the intricate mechanics of the game and build creation just isn't for everyone. And I even for myself, I'll say, while I enjoy the learning aspects of the game and how things interact, I do typically prefer to just follow someone else's build who is an expert and has the time to sit and test their builds and the different skill nodes and identify what is the best and most efficient way to kind of go about things. I understand that's might sound blasphemous to some, and some might feel that that is not, cool. It doesn't make me a true PoE 2 player because the build creation part of it isn't something that I enjoy, but that's how I like to play games, and that's what part of my limitations are given my time constraints. And if that is how you are, then I would maybe hold off. The game, given it's been out for 3 to 4 weeks now, is obviously very early on. People are still doing a lot of testing. People are still figuring stuff out. There's a lot of stuff that hasn't been added to the game. Most of the weapon types haven't been added to the game, and there's also 4 classes that haven't been added yet. So there's a ton of theory crafting still to do. And on top of that, there's going to be a lot of balance patches, right? So there are some builds right now that are literally broken and that mechanics are overtuned and allow people to probably do more damage than they should. And so there's also going to be a lot of changes to the current builds and what are the current best builds. One other thing to note is that a lot of the builds that are out there now are primarily end game builds. So the builds are mainly focused on once you're like level 60 plus or something like that, and you have a variety of passive points. You've already kind of done the whole leveling experience and can just reallocate the points to be in a position to do what the build guide is showing. However, whether it because folks haven't had the time or everyone is just rushing to try to get out as many builds and build ideas as they can, there aren't as many leveling guides or leveling components to the guides. So you've got the end game build, but then not really the steps to get there. The second reason why you might want to wait to play Path of Exile 2 is that you like to play hardcore. Now, this should be somewhat self explanatory because the game is in its early access stage, but the game isn't finished. It's not fully polished. Everything isn't fully balanced. Not all of the content is in the game yet. And so, what that means is that there is a greater likelihood of you dying to some random bullshit or a bug or some unpolished crap versus when the game fully comes out. Right? I know this seems like it should be self-explanatory, but it's always interesting to me when I see people review early access games and they review them or seem to treat them like it's a finished product, right? I read a post the other day about someone who died in hardcore and was just raging and shitting on this game and talking about how they were never going to play it ever again. And it's like, okay, I understand you. I recently lost a hardcore character as well. And while I was irritated, it's early access, and truthfully, it's my fault for wanting to do that anyways. There are certain things in the game that just are known to either be an issue or be bugged. The perfect example of this, which just killed my latest hardcore character, is the Colossus. If you have not played the game yet or you haven't gotten there, the Colossus is one of the bosses in Act 2, and it has this really stupid attack where it digs its knife into the platform, drags it across really, really fast, which makes it very challenging to dodge, in my opinion. And it will basically one-shot you every time, no matter how much defenses you have at that point in the game. I read one report. Some people had like 2,000 or 3,000 health when they went to fight the boss the first time in Act 2, which is an insane amount of health or energy shield for that stage of the game. And they were still being one-shot. And to me, that just feels like it's a bug. And if it's not a bug, it is a terribly designed boss mechanic. I am generally not the biggest fan of insta-kill mechanics, but if you're going to have an insta-kill mechanic, I think it needs to be done kind of how they typically do it in MMOs, which is, hey, there's a clear wind-up for this insta-kill mechanic, but there's a clear kind of delineation of where the hit is going to land and then where you need to be in order to dodge that mechanic. Because otherwise it's just cheap and cheesy, especially if you're playing on hardcore, because then you can just die, right, at any point in time. And so, look, I it's early access. The game's not fully polished yet, and so if you're going to play hardcore, do so at your own risk. The fourth reason why you might want to wait before playing Path of Exile 2 is that you are just someone who likes to play games in their finished state and are not an early access type of person. And that's okay. I think one of the important things to always ground yourself in life is expectations. And so if you were going into an early access game or a beta game and you're expecting the game to be fully polished and fully finished and to be completely bug free and to not have any things that need improvement and any sort of inconvenience or unfinished thing in the game, it's just going to absolutely send you into a rage and make you want to throw your controller against a wall or smash your keyboard or something like that. You just shouldn't play an early access game, right? And that's not to say that you're not entitled to have your opinions, right? You can be upset about various mechanics in a game and where a game is. At the end of the day, the game studio is choosing to put out content for the world to see and for the world to judge. And we as human beings are naturally going to judge anything that's put in front of us. But with that said, you need to judge it through the lens of, again, it being an early access game. And so uh, if you know yourself, and this is only a decision that you can only make for yourself, knowing how you are when you play games, but if you know that you are just the type of person who doesn't have the patience to sit through balance fixes and refinements and bugs and missing features and capabilities, then maybe wait. There's clearly a variety of things that can be improved in the game currently, the Colossus boss fight being one of them, the other being the fact that the mace is incredibly terrible to play with, but that's okay, right? I expect them to fix it. And what GGG Studios has shown their community over the years, both with POE and even in the first couple of weeks of POE 2 coming out, and the patches that they've already released to bring quality of life improvements to the game, is that the player experience and player feedback really matters to them. You can tell that they listen to their players and they want to have the best possible experience for the people playing it. It might take a little bit of time for some of these fixes to make it into the game, and there might be a prioritization list that they're doing based on what they're hearing, and that might not necessarily align with your prioritization list of what you would like to see in the game. But I think generally they've built enough goodwill with their players over time. I would think, this is my perception, that I would expect that they're going to get to resolving many of the issues that people have or see with the game as it is now in early access. And so I personally will probably wait a bit before I start playing PoE 2 again. The reason being is that I found playing ARPGs, unless it's on hardcore, to be a little bit not fulfilling or rewarding. It kind of, I hate losing characters and losing the time and effort and energy that I put into building that character. But at the same time, without that sense of fear of loss when you're in a boss fight and the intensity of it, and the focus on building an overall balanced character that has to care about survivability as much as doing damage, the game just feels, games in general, ARPGs feel very hollow as an experience for me. And so given that I want to play on hardcore, but the game is not really polished enough to where I won't lose my shit if I, like, I've probably died 3 dozen times to the Colossus fight. This was on mostly on softcore because of that one shot mechanic. Maybe it's just me sucking and I just can't get that mechanic down. But like, that is just, I'm gonna lose it if I keep ramming my head against the wall and dying to that. And so knowing myself, I I need to wait and I'll come back when things are a little bit more refined, right? And that's okay. I want to close off this video by saying, if you're playing Path of Exile 2, whether on softcore or hardcore, and you are having a good time, keep playing the game. That is okay. Just because I have my couple of reasons why I think somebody should wait to play the game and because I am waiting before I jump back into the game doesn't mean you have to do the same. And just because you might want to wait and aren't having the most amount of fun in the early access version of the game doesn't mean that it's blasphemy for someone to be having fun in the current iteration. Everyone is entitled to feel how they feel about where the game is currently. And really, the most important thing is that you should optimize where you're spending your time and where you're having the most fun with your gaming. I know for myself, I've first of all gotten more than $30 worth of enjoyment out of the game. That's not a to some that might be a tremendous amount of money, but I don't view that as a generally huge amount of money for a game, especially when you can easily get 30 hours of decent fun out of it. But the other thing is, even when I buy a game or spend money on a game, even if I stop playing it or don't get a whole lot of playtime out of it because it's not my cup of tea, I always am okay with giving money to studios who are doing good and actually care about their player base. And regardless of what you feel about Path of Exile 2 as a game, I think it's very challenging to make the case that GGG doesn't give a shit about its players and is just trying to squeeze them for all the money that they're worth, and they just don't care, right? So with that in mind, if you're playing Path of Exile 2, I hope you're enjoying it. And if you're waiting with me, then hopefully in a couple of months or a year, when the game releases fully, it's in a state where all of us can enjoy the game together. So do you agree with the 4 reasons that I gave in this video to wait to play Path of Exile 2? Or do you disagree with them? Do you think that the points that I made are completely invalid? Let me know your thoughts below in the comments. And if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up.